It's interesting. We all have our whys, and my dad grew up in an orphanage. So his dad died when he was 5. His mom was, true story, actually a prostitute. It's fascinating listening to my dad and my mom talk about my grandmother on my dad's side. So my dad and his brothers grew up extremely poor. My mother kind of grew up the same way. The summer I graduated high school, I worked in a fitness center, and I met a man named Terry Wilson who bought me a book called Think and Grow Rich. And I walked in the guy's living room, and first question he said was, "How old are you?" And I said, 18. He said, "How'd you like to be able to retire by the time you're 30? And I went, "Great, what do I got to do?" From Wealth Creators USA, this is From Worry to Wealth, the podcast that shatters the myths and mystique surrounding wealth creation. As students, our schools and universities often neglect the crucial education on the core financial principles. I'm Ben Lyons. I'm a business owner, investor, entrepreneur, and author, and I'm joined by my business partner, Alex Fink. And together, we're here to inspire your journey towards improving your financial self. In a world buzzing with advice on the behaviors and mindset to become wealthy, we'll share proven processes tried and tested by our network of successful collaborators. So get ready to move past worry and move towards wealth and your improved financial self. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Lyons, back with you with my good friend,
esteemed
colleague,
Alex Fink.
Thank you, Alex Fink.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, and this is the podcast From Worry to Wealth. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects. You know what that is, Alex?
I'd have to guess it's you.
Yes, we're going to talk about me today.
Amazing guess. Yeah.
We'll talk about you another time, but for today, this podcast is going to be about me.
Perfect.
So how exciting is that for me to talk about me?
I'm excited. I would assume you're even more excited to talk to me.
You can talk about me if you want.
That's right.
But I get to share my story, actually leading up to this book, right? From Worry to Wealth, which is the title of our podcast. And it's going to be really fun to talk about how this all came about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to let you ask me questions, because it would be a little strange if I asked myself the questions and then I answered. What do you think about that?
It could be entertaining, but I think it's better the other way.
I've talked to myself often.
Yeah, that's
I've
right.
even answered myself.
Right.
But sometimes I even say, huh, to the answer.
Right. Perfect.
So Alex, before we get started of talking about me, anything you want to say to the world of Worry to Wealth out there?
Just thanks for joining us. And I think we've got some great content for you. And we look forward to imparting some of the information that we feel can help people. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And for those people that are just tuning in for the first time, we should mention that this is the From Worry to Wealth podcast, which is really to unravel the process of how wealth gets created. And our focus is mostly on process and not about behavior, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
We're not going to sit here and give them motivational speeches too much, are we?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Just the goods. We're just giving them
just
the goods.
That's right.
Well, let's start. Talk about your childhood, early childhood, and some of your development, potentially parental situation, how you grew up, that sort of thing.
Only if I can borrow a line from you that I was born a very small child.
A very young boy.
I was born a very young boy.
Yes, you may.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We all have our whys, and my dad grew up in an orphanage. So his dad died when he was 5. So my dad literally grew up in an orphanage in the inner city of Philadelphia. His mom was, true story, actually a prostitute. And it's fascinating listening to my dad and my mom talk about my grandmother on my dad's side. So my dad and his brothers grew up extremely poor. My mother kind of grew up the same way. My mother's parents never owned a home. My mother's dad my grandfather was a cook. I mean, that was his vocation.
What area of the country?
Inner city of Philly.
Okay.
Yeah, in some very difficult neighborhoods of Philly, which is where I was born. So I lived actually in the inner city of Philly until I was 9. So I grew up in an environment where both my parents, growing up poor, really had a poor mindset. And I often say that you learn how to be poor from poor people. right? You learn how to
for
be
sure.
depressed from depressed people. And, I don't want this podcast to talk too much about my parents, but I do believe that we're influenced, and I talk a lot about in the book about how our first influences are our family.
For sure.
And often that sets the stage for our mindset. But my parents both died early, young. They both had kind of a mental disease, drug abuse. So, yeah, very, very interesting thing, but fascinating for me. And thankfully for me, at age 18, I put myself into a situation where, and I like to tell my story for those that don't know my story. I don't want to be long-winded, but the summer I graduated high school, I worked in a fitness center, and I met a man named Terry Wilson who bought me a book called Think and Grow Rich. And this guy, Terry, had a PhD in exercise physiology, but he was in the real estate business. And he said, go find something that's lucrative if you want to improve your financial self. And I got a book on real estate from a neighbor. I didn't know that neighbor was having breakfast with another neighbor's wife. So that neighbor told the other neighbor's husband, hey, this guy Ben was asking for a real estate book. And a week later, this guy, as I was jogging in my parents' neighborhood, pulled up and said, are you Ben? And I said, yeah. He said, were you the one asking about real estate? And I said, yes. He said, well, my father and I own a real estate company and a lending company. And here's my address. Can you come talk to me? And I did. And I walked in the guy's living room, and first question he said was, how old are you? And I said, 18. He said, how'd you like to be able to retire by the time you're 30? And I went, great. What do I got to do? He said, well, my dad is retiring to Florida. We've been in the real estate business for 40 years. And I understand you want to get in the space. And we'll teach you, but I'm not going to pay you. So you got to come work for free. So I took the job. I went home and I said, Mom, Dad, great news, got a job.
So this is something that you created through reaching out in whatever venue you were in. So this opportunity seems almost like it came to you, but it sounds to me like you were pretty motivated, and you were interested in doing something that may be helpful to your life. And you kind of, even though this quote unquote mentor came to you, you sort of created this scenario by just getting the word out that you were interested in this space. It sounds like, right?
When we ask questions, sometimes people will give us answers.
Right.
My number one advice of young people or anybody looking to advance themselves is, are you asking questions?
And I feel like the answer is probably no for most people. So that's why I wanted to get to how this, because this it seems to me that this shaped a lot of your life, your adult life, and your career.
Yeah.
Just by you taking the initiative. So I would say more taking the initiative than anything else, right?
Yeah, I would say when they say luck is what happens, or success is what happens when preparedness meets opportunity, luck is also what happens when preparedness meets opportunity. And I believe that we create our luck or we create our success by asking questions. Because when we ask questions, how do I do that? How do I get there? How do I accomplish that? How do I learn that? How do I get where you are? If you ask enough questions and you ask it seriously, where you really care about the answer, you'll find the answer.
Did you ask about real estate because that was something you were interested in? Or
No.
Was it just a random?
No. So I worked 10th, 11th, and 12th grade summers at the local fitness center for minimum wage. And I was a friendly guy, and I ran into a guy who happened to have a PhD in exercise physiology, and I was really into fitness and thought that was my path. And we just were talking. This was a guy that was in his late 30s who, while he had a PhD in exercise physiology, was in the real estate business. And I
just random. Yeah.
And I thought I was going to go into exercise, some sort of fitness.
Right.
Couldn't get into a college, but I thought I was going to go into some sort of fitness strategy. But he said, well, Ben, is making money important to you? And I said, yes, of course. He said, then you don't want to get into the exercise business. I said, I don't. What do I want to get into? He said, real estate.
Otherwise, this could have been a workout video that we were doing right now.
That's
It would have been
right.
nice. Yeah.
And I said, real estate. Okay, that sounds great. But what he did was he gave me a book called Think and Grow Rich. And if for those of you that have read the book Think and Grow Rich, what it talks about is specialized knowledge. It said you really have to be a specialist in something because the universe will only give you value based on the value you create. And I said, okay, I'm going to try to become an expert in real estate. Now, I didn't have any money or I didn't know where to start, but I knew my neighbor was a realtor. So I knocked on her door and asked her for some books on real estate. Yes, that took my...
It's initiative, yeah.
That took my initiative.
Right.
And it was very lucky for me that she was having breakfast with another neighbor's wife.
Wow.
So that's actually how this all
Wow,
started.
that's amazing. But
I asked
the
questions.
genesis was you took the initiative and asked questions.
Yes, and I think that's the reality of any successful person. Think of anybody successful. They ask questions. Would this product work? Would this idea be good? Would this strategy be the right one? Is this the right path? If you ask enough questions and act on those questions, I think you can achieve anything.
It also makes, I think, as an aside, for potentially great leadership, right? When you don't just follow a path that you think is right, you engage in whether whoever it is, right? It could be the maintenance person in the building. It could be another executive, right? So I think asking questions is kind of important.
And the interesting thing, the reason we put this book together and the reason we have this course, Alex, is that people that have already been there and done that have tried and failed, or have actually succeeded, the patterns and the clues are already there. And when somebody asks me after 40 years of being in business, what's the one mistake you made? And I say the one mistake I made was that I was my own mentor, effectively, in running companies. And I failed miserably the first dozen years. And when you ask somebody that's already been there and done that, I mean, think about somebody trying to lose weight that was once heavy and is now physically fit. If you're heavy and you're trying to be physically fit, you have to go to the person that's been there and done that.
For sure.
And I think for me, asking questions was the key. But that first day, August 21st, 1983, which was my first day on the job. But let's get back to the prior statement, because the one thing I like to tell that's kind of funny is when I went home and I said, hey, Mom, hey, Dad.
I was going to ask you about that too. How did your parents react to it?
I went home and I said, I got a job. And my dad said, that's great. What does it pay? And I said, nothing. And my mom and dad said, get out. So at age 18,
nice.
Which was pretty cool, at age 18, I moved out, moved in with a girlfriend at the time. I had no money. I had no furniture. And I remember we had, for our living room furniture, I had a lawn chair that I got so it was in a junk pile.
Sounds
lovely. Free.
Yeah, it's nice.
And those, I don't know if they even make them anymore. They're the wooden spindles where they wrapped large spools of wire. That was my table. Mm-hmm. And that was it. That was my furniture, my living room furniture.
Wow.
So that was the beginning.
So do you feel like your parents, were they trying to get you to go down a different path, or what do you think was the catalyst to them kicking you out of then? You didn't listen to them? They wanted you to do something else? What?
Yeah, my dad, again, growing up in an orphanage, he went through night school. It took him 11 years. He got a college degree in 11 years at night.
Good for him.
So he was able to move himself from poverty, basically, into computer science. And he actually went on to get a master's degree. And so he was educated. It took him many years. And his belief was the only way you can achieve economic success is through education. And while I agree, now that I'm almost 60, I agree that education is critical. There's a difference between formal education and education.
For sure.
So my advice is education. His advice was only formal education. The problem is I barely graduated high school. Those that have looked at my high school transcript have laughed.
Yeah.
And-
But his experience, your father's experience was I was able to get farther along, right? Given my
That's
education.
right.
Yeah.
His way out of poverty was education.
Education. Yeah. Makes sense.
And he just assumed that if I did not get a college education, that I would never be able to have the income to not
Right.
be in poverty like himself. And, this is the reason we exist in this podcast and in this course.
Yeah, for sure.
Because
for sure.
there are alternatives.
More than one path to success, for sure.
Yeah.
And what you find, I think you would agree with this, is when we talk to mentors, they often want to put you down their path, right? Or parents, right?
Yeah.
Especially parents.
Yeah.
Whether, hey, you should be a doctor, you should be this, but yeah, that is a nice thing about this podcast is, revealing this information and explaining different ways to get there, for sure.
Yeah.
So you're 18.
18, August 21st,
You walk in, yeah.
1983. I drove a car that had no air conditioning. So it's mid-August in Maryland.
so-
It was hot.
Nice
I had
weather.
no suit. Okay, and I go to work, but I knew the first day. I knew by noon that I would do this for the rest of my life. And how did I know that? I'll tell you why. A lot of people ask me, why and how did I know this? And the reason is that the moment I walked in this office, there was like 4 support people there, and then there was this father and a son. The energy was totally different. The mindset was totally different. There was an awareness. I tell people there was an awareness like, I don't want to say, it had nothing to do with money. It was a wealth awareness. It was a wealth mindset where I went, you know what? I think I can do this for the rest of my life. And it was the environment of that. Did I know a lot about real estate by noon? No. Did I know anything about lending by noon? No. But I
Did you
knew.
describe that as the culture of the office or just the people that were there? Was it
Yeah.
just their energy? What?
Yeah, it was just a very different experience
Right.
than what I grew up with in my house.
I could imagine. Yeah.
So that really became enlightened. And I think part of the reason for us excited about this podcast is that we get the benefit of providing an awareness to other people, right?
I agree. Yeah, I completely agree. So you're 18, you start this business. That seems like a really pivotal moment. Did you have any other?
Well, I didn't start the business. The guy hired me, but I didn't get paid.
Oh, right.
Right. So he taught me how to
I
buy
assume
real
that
estate.
I assume that meant that your efforts would garner some pay at some point.
Well, I didn't know when that would be.
Okay, so
When
you
I
had no
started.
path. You had no path.
I had no idea.
Wow. So he was testing you. Maybe he was testing you to see if you were willing to put in the effort, or
Something inside of me said the knowledge was more valuable than the paycheck.
yeah. it's
Now, at nights
great
and
attitude.
weekends, just so everybody knows, at nights and weekends, I worked.
Right.
I had to go to work.
I think
at night.
that's your attitude in that regard is quite a bit different than a lot of 18-year-olds. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
sure.
right. You've seen it
Especially
firsthand,
today.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
You're
children-
making an investment in yourself, right? You're hoping, but it sounds to me like you felt comfort given how these guys culturally were success and successful people. And it sounds to me like you saw that, recognized that, which I think is also a tough thing to do at that age, right? When you don't even know what you want to do, and you might want to be at the beach or wherever you want to be when you're 18, right?
Yeah.
That's good.
I have no idea why I said yes.
Do you think you were motivated because? So a lot of kids, when their parents tell them they want them to go a certain way, they go another way, and they're more motivated by that. Do you think not having the support of your parents was a piece of your motivation, or do you think it just inherently came to you?
Yeah, I think that when somebody grows up where there's some deficiency and they're aware of that deficiency, they potentially devote a lot of energy
To resolve
to
it.
resolve that.
And in this case, what was in your mind? What was your?
Well, I think what happens is you've heard that story about the 2 brothers, maybe twin brothers. I'm not sure exactly how the story goes, where the father was an alcoholic and one son devoted his life against alcoholism and the other son became an alcoholic.
Yeah,
And
makes
when,
sense.
and when they asked both of them the same question, why do you think you are the way you are? And they both answered exactly the same way. What do you expect? My father was an alcoholic. Right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I think for me, I became aware of what it was like to be broke, what it was like to be worried about money every second of the day, to have this, my parents fought every day over money. I mean, it was literally.
So the object of money and the stress around money was an ever-present part of your life growing up, and it was something that you acknowledged and something that you strive to rectify or correct, and wanted to create a path where you didn't live that same way as your parents. It sounds to me.
At a very young age, meaning 15, 16, I recognized that there's some deficiency going on in my family. And for some reason, there's pain and suffering, and it has to do with their lack of finances. For whatever reason.
Did you were you able to compare? How did you make that comparison and know that you were in a bad situation? Was it inherent knowledge, the fighting? Did you go over to a friend's house and saw them living differently?
That is a great question.
You might not even remember.
Well, there was a neighbor who owned. I don't want to use names, but there was a neighbor who owned a company, relatively successful company.
So you saw a different way of life potentially.
And I saw a whole different family dynamic there.
Okay.
But I fundamentally asked the question, I don't understand. Why do some people have abundance of financial wealth and other people don't? Why are some people happy and some people aren't? Why are some people physically fit and some people aren't? I asked a lot of questions really leading up to the age 18. I still ask questions today, but for me, questions of why, why can some people be worth 100 million and other people be broke?
Yeah.
I was curious to that question.
Right.
And that questioning led me to continue to ask questions. And when you learn the difference between what you do with your time and how you think and your attitude and your approach to life, I saw, the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki talks about his two dads and his two dads' approach. It's fundamentally, I saw that. But I saw it in the guy I worked for.
Of course.
And I saw it at home where I live.
That's why it clicked right away, it sounds like.
Very clear.
Yeah.
You want to have one outcome, act that way and live that way. You want to have another outcome, act and live that way. And it was diabolically different.
So you created the opportunity. You attempted to capitalize on the opportunity, right? So the opportunity was there. You took the steps necessary, even getting kicked out of your own house, right? Your parents' house. That's how dedicated and motivated you were, right? Because that opportunity comes along for other people. They get kicked out. It's like, okay, I'm going to stay with my parents. And this is obviously not for me. I feel like when you agree that some people are in that situation where they don't want to take that risk, right? But how do you go from that? And that's kind of a huge moment, it sounds like, in your life, right? How do you go from that to the next phase?
Learning was hard for me in school, but learning in real life, when I recognized I was on a vehicle that was going to change my life, that became very different. Many people that are in school, high schools or colleges, aren't really sure why they're there learning. What's the point of being there?
Yes, hear it all the time.
What's the point of learning something, of knowing something? And until somebody gets in their heart and soul why that information is so valuable, it's not going to be meaningful. And that's a whole different topic for a whole different podcast.
It's like having a kid has $1,000 in their wallet and finds a $1 bill or a $10 bill. It's like, okay, I don't really care about this, right? Somebody has no money and sees this as an opportunity. It's an interesting thing.
Well, knowledge, that saying knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I recognized very quickly that the more I knew and the more I became an expert in lending money and in real estate, the more power I would have.
So part of that sounds like it may come from your father's influence too.
Possibly,
Because he
sure.
was, I'm not sure I knew that entirely about, maybe I did, but it sounds to me like he was very focused on education, very focused on knowledge, but in a different setting. So you took that, applied it to business, and perhaps that shaped a lot of your young life to go out and seek the education that you want, but in a different way than your father did. Sounds like.
Yeah, I think my parents did the best they could with what they had, and I'm grateful for whatever they were and however they were and whoever they were. I have nothing negative or regrets. It was just an observation of just how you can approach life. But in the book Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill talks about having specialized knowledge, because if you are an expert at something, then you can monetize that. And that's the key, being an expert in something. And I became an expert in lending. And what had happened was, and the pivotal moment, though, of this story is really that on Thanksgiving weekend, I said to the guy I was working for, look, you're not really doing anything with this lending license of yours. And I think there's a lot of opportunity here with lending money. Let me run with this. I want you to spend $150. Back then, there was a newspaper. I don't think it was called the News American. It's not even in existence today. But there was a section called Money to Loan. It was $150 for a month to put an ad in the Money to Loan section. And I said, hey, Ron, would you spend $150 for this ad?
Wow.
And let me have half, after I pay you the $150 back, let me have half the commission.
Nice.
That was Thanksgiving weekend.
And this was with the gentleman that you started to work with.
Yes.
Interesting.
What
And
ended up happening?
how did you know about that? So he didn't set you on that path, somebody else did?
I knew that lending money was an opportunity. He was doing some lending himself, but wasn't really running with the lending thing.
Got it.
And I knew that there was a section in the newspaper called Money to Loan. And I thought maybe it would work.
Okay.
I mean, look, sometimes accidents or luck happens.
Don't you have to have the money to loan?
Yes.
Right.
I wasn't the lender.
Right.
I was a mortgage broker.
Okay. Nice.
And I had established relationships with various other lenders.
Got it. And those relationships that you learned about that from this same guy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So there was a list of lenders that I had been introduced to. And what ended up happening, so we put the ad in Thanksgiving weekend. January of the following year, so 2 months later, I did $10,000 in fee income. I closed like six or seven
in 1 month.
loans. In 1 month.
Wow. Good for you.
I got $5,000.
Good for you.
Okay.
That's
$5,000
great.
in 1984
Yeah. It's a lot of money.
to a 20-year-old?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 20 at the time.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money. That set the stage for everything.
Did you get any furniture by any chance when you got
Yes,
the $5,000?
I did. In
What did you
fact,
do with it? What did you do with the first money? This is something I have to know, and I'm sure the viewers
I
want to know
bought my first house for $51,350. It was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath Cape Cod.
Well, that sounds like a very smart thing to do with your
Beautiful house. So
first money.
I bought that house, and then I rented out 2 of the rooms to 2 kids I went to high school with and hired both of them.
So you bought it for your own primary residence.
Yes.
Good for you.
And then
Wow.
I bought a BMW after that.
Okay, I was waiting for.
Yeah.
I was waiting for.
I
that
bought a
bit.
red
Yeah, yeah.
BMW after
Okay.
that. A 325i.
It sounds fancy.
It
Yeah.
was fancy.
Red. So understated with a red color.
Yes. Yeah. And by the way, in 1985, they came out with those bag phones. There was a phone in a bag.
Okay.
I was like one of the first to have a phone, a
Oh
portable
yeah, you
phone.
could. Yeah, you could carry it
It was
around.
a big
Yeah,
bag.
Yeah.
It was about,
Yeah. Yeah.
to have a phone in a bag.
Wow.
You were the shit.
Yeah.
I was the shit.
Yeah.
So at age
Well,
21,
red BMW,
I'm
your
right,
own
driving
place.
a red
Yeah.
BMW. I own my own house.
Well, hold on before you get so. From the time that you started with this group, it sounds like you had some internal dialogue. You the lending side of it connected with you. That gentleman that you were partnered with or was mentoring you wasn't as focused on that business. You decided to focus on the business. How soon from that time that you started working with this gentleman to when you closed those deals, how long did that take you? Trying to give
I started
the viewers
August
an idea of how
21st.
long.
I started August 21st, 1983. And it was January
Of the following year or the?
of 1985.
Okay, so it was a year and a half.
It was a year and a half
Yeah.
before I was capable of doing that.
So how long, and just for the people listening, right? How long were you in that world before you made? It sounds like you didn't make any money before that.
No, what had happened was August all the way through, for the first 4 months, I was paid zero.
Okay,
Probably illegal today. Back then.
probably, yeah. Back then it was okay.
And then I started getting paid $150 a week, but then I had tax. I was an employee, so I had taxes taken out. I cleared $111 and I think 53 cents
That sounds
a week.
Could probably afford that apartment of yours, possibly, right?
Yeah, it was.
How much did you pay for your apartment at the time? Do you recall?
Yeah, it was in 1983. It was about 800, 750 a month was my
That's
rent.
a lot. That's more than I would have thought.
Well, I had a girlfriand that lived with me. She worked too.
Okay, so she paid for some of it. Interesting.
paid for
so you
some,
guys
I
were
paid for
barely scraping by.
Oh yeah, we were
for
broke.
a long time, right?
Yeah,
Wow.
broke.
That's amazing. And how? So, I think I understand now the way in which you got into the lending space. But how did you make the leap from, I just made a little bit of money, I'm now going to buy a house? Did anybody give you that advice, or is that something you came up with on your own?
Well, let's make sure that everybody understands. My first job was to go track down everybody that was in foreclosure every day.
Okay.
So he introduced me to knocking on doors of people in foreclosure. So I actually learned how to buy real estate.
At a discount, potentially.
I learned how to buy real estate and close
Right.
on real estate deals
Right.
before I learned how to lend money.
Got it.
So I actually got my real estate license at age 19.
Right.
And I learned the real estate business at age 19. I bought my first property for him, not for me, for the guy I worked for, at age 19. And I didn't buy my first house until I was 20. But I had already bought 4 or 5 properties for the guy I worked for and already understood real estate.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. So not a leap at all. It sounds like you were doing that anyway.
It was real estate
Inherently.
first and then lending second.
Great. Great. So you bought your first house. You're now renting it out. What's next?
Well, I hired 2 of my high school friends, and we ended up building a pretty successful mortgage production within this guy's company. And we did that for a couple of years.
So going back to the core tenets of the program, right? You knew that you needed income, right? So you seeked opportunities in that space. You then found an opportunity that you connected with. You endeavored to work that opportunity. It worked. You used that money to start acquiring assets, right? You used that asset to gain additional income through the renting. I assume you were renting the place. So you use that rental income to pay for the asset, right? And now you're leveraging. I assume you financed. Did you say you financed the purchase, right?
The house?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you use somebody. So you borrowed money to buy the house. Mm-hmm. There's a cost on that. You use the rental income from the roommates to pay that down, and then you start to leverage your knowledge to bring other people in to grow your income piece.
That's right.
Sounds yeah.
Yeah, I had
So you're doing
started
this
doing
perfectly
so
so
many
far.
loans
Yeah.
that I ended up hiring 2 of my high school buddies, taught
Right.
them how to do loans.
Right.
And all 3 of us were now doing loans.
Yeah. Knowledge and human capital. Yeah.
And the truth, I mean, I'm going to share what actually happened. I started out as a 50-50 partner, splitting the revenue with a guy that hired me. And then
With the brokerage. With the
brokerage.
With the mortgage broker. Yeah.
Then what happened a year later, when a 20-year-old, at age 20, my tax return said, I believe I made about 50 some odd $1,000.
Right.
And this is in 1985. So in 1985, 50 some odd thousand is equivalent to about 150 today. And truth be told, this guy came to me and said, there's no way a 20-year-old should be making this kind of money. I'm going to take you from 50% to 40%.
So I was just going to mention the 50%. I was surprised to hear. Are you surprised now looking back that he gave you 50%?
No, because it was my idea. He was doing nothing with it.
Got
I
it.
went to him and said, if I make you $1,
Okay.
can I have half?
So then it sounds like he got a little bit greedy.
He
Yeah.
had nothing to lose. If I
Right.
make you $1, can I
Right.
have half?
Yeah, exactly.
Would you
Yeah.
say no to that?
Right.
I'll take anybody in the world that wants to come
Yeah.
to me and say, I'll make you $1, I get half.
True, because it wasn't his strategy, it was your strategy.
It wasn't his
Interesting.
story, it was mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he bumped you down after you
Oh,
created.
it gets worse. So we kept building this mortgage
I think this
operation.
might be a lesson for business owners too.
That's
as we-
right.
Right.
That's exactly right. I'll tell you
Yeah,
a piece of
for
that.
sure.
I don't want to be too long-winded today about my story, but a year after that, I'm now 21, and it goes even lower. He says, "Listen,
Oh, so you were okay with the 40%
I accepted the 40."
because you probably felt like you owed it to this guy. It's an interesting
So
conversation.
on the revisit again, I went, "No way, I'm out." And I took the two guys with me, and it was August 21st.
Wow.
It was to the day. It was 4 years to the day.
Wow.
August 21st, 1987,
On the day.
on the day,
Wow.
I started my own mortgage company. But I didn't want to just be a broker. I wanted to be the lender. And my net worth wasn't going to allow me to do that. So I had become friends with the president of a local community bank. And he really liked me, thought I was just a hard worker, a smart guy.
How did you meet him?
He was one of the lenders I was brokering loans to.
Got it. Okay.
His bank was
so
very
he
aggressive.
probably appreciated your
Yeah.
process and your hustle. Yeah.
So I went to him, and I don't want to give you his name, but I went to him and said, "Hey, I'm leaving this guy. I'm going to start my own thing. Would you be willing to co-sign a line of credit so I can start lending money?" And at first he said no.
And what was his role in the bank?
He was president.
Okay. He was the president of the bank. Okay. That's interesting.
And then about 6 months into it, when I was just killing it, as a broker, he says, "All right, I'm in."
And yeah. And so he gave you, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
He gave you a line of credit.
so
Yeah.
he co-signed a line of credit with me, but I had to give him part of the company.
Got it.
So that's kind of how my whole game got started. Here
It's
we
a
are.
great- It's a
40
great
years
story.
later.
Yeah. What's
40 years later.
amazing about it is just like this applies to every industry and every business owner. You were kind of leveraging it seems to me you were leveraging the principles that we're teaching right in these courses
Right.
from almost day one that you were doing this, which is, I think, kind of surprising, right?
Yeah, and I think the point of our podcast is to give people a path and a roadmap that is intentional.
Right.
Mine was unintentional, right? I mean,
Right.
accidental, unintentional, whatever. What we have to look at is, when you're almost 60, I can tell you exactly what I did to get here. And we can dissect it, we can unravel it, we can
Right.
explain it, and we can use that to teach a 20-year-old, look, here's what you should do, here's what you shouldn't do. And that's the whole point of this, that the book you don't read won't help, the course you don't take won't help, right? You can be armed with a lot of good information if you're willing to ask the questions.
Right.
And that's the point of our podcast.
Right. Looking back, it seems to me if you had this roadmap, things would have been a little bit. Even though it seems easy, right, to me and possibly to the viewers, but I would assume you made some mistakes along the way that some of these teachings would have helped resolve.
Oh man, here's my really powerful answer to this. PNC Bank, when I was 29, and I made a lot of money at age 29. That year was my first taxable income. I'm going to share this, over $1 million.
It's big money back then.
And
Big money now.
I had a line of credit with PNC Bank. Even back then, PNC Bank existed. And they sent a team of people in. And at the exit interview, this guy comes into my office who was in his 50s. I'm 29. And he said, you know, Ben, I gotta hand it to you. You're probably the most... Your company probably produces the most revenue per employee we've ever seen. But you're also probably one of the most inefficient companies we've ever seen. I'm like, oh, well, what do you mean? So he gave me a compliment, and then he just took it all away. He said, your sales skills, your ability to generate revenue is tremendous. But a lot of running a business is lacking. You're missing controls, you're missing inefficiencies, you're missing details.
So he's talking about maximizing your efforts, right?
And he said, if you could just learn that other piece of it, and it was I had already been
probably humbling for you to hear.
Very humbling.
Can I ask a question before you go deeper into it? The $1 million that you made, how much of that $1 million was from your efforts, and how much was from leveraging your knowledge and skills to produce that from other people's efforts?
I'd say 75% of the revenue was from the team that I had built.
Right. Yeah. So that's, for folks, listening and trying to learn, that's 4 times more than you would have made if you would really just focused on your own efforts. Right.
Yeah.
So by venturing out and using the principles that we're teaching, even at that age, you made a tremendous amount of money, but a multiple of that money more given the principles that we're teaching right now.
Yeah. And we want to, I tell a story about a guy named Sandy Weil. And I hope I get this story right. If Jamie Dimon is watching this, for those of you, Jamie Dimon.
He's a
JP Morgan Chase.
Right. He's a loyal viewer of ours for sure. For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a little company in Baltimore called Commercial Credit, which kept getting spun up, which became Citicorp. My understanding is that Jamie Dimon, who's now the chairman, right, and head of JP Morgan Chase.
Yep.
I'm going back 30 some years, 40, maybe 40 years. But Sandy Weil was Jamie Dimon's boss. And Sandy Weil was I think the founder of Citicorp, Citigroup.
Yep, I think that's right.
And I use this story to say that if you've got somebody that already has a formula for success, the best thing you could do is learn that formula and work for that person.
Right.
And get that information and then leverage that for the rest of your life. And getting back to your question, the one regret I have, and when I say regret, the one observation is that I pissed away more money through not knowing and inefficiencies from age 21 probably to age 35 than most people make in a lifetime, because I didn't understand.
Relate that to the principles in the course. What specifics would you say? Inefficiencies, nothing generic, but what can you relate that to the specific principles in the course?
In the course, we talk about things like scalability of income, variable A, acquisition of assets, utilizing leverage, and utilizing time. Variable C is leverage. And this is the area where I'm talking about. This is where it was a mistake. I had all the specialized knowledge around lending and real estate anybody could ever get. What I failed to do, because of ego, and also because of awareness, what I failed to do was really be honest with myself as to the area where I needed to leverage other people. I am strong in certain areas. I am weak in others. And
so you didn't have a business mentor, unfortunately, you weren't self-aware enough to know where your weaknesses existed, and therefore you didn't try to resolve those weaknesses with other individuals or human capital.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I wasn't self-aware to know that I should have leveraged talents in areas like information technology, management,
Right.
things that I'm just not.
Your business was totally focused on what you were good at.
That's right.
And the things you weren't good at, you didn't try to add to that business. That's interesting.
Yeah, so what PNC Bank, this guy from PNC Bank was saying is the same thing I'm saying, which is I was able to generate on the front end, where my core competency was, a lot of activity and revenue.
Right.
But I wasn't skilled enough to have the controls and management in place to manage the business.
At what age did you come to that realization?
After I pissed away millions of dollars, so probably in my mid to late 30s.
It's pretty soon after.
15 years.
Yeah.
You say soon. I was 21 when I started.
Well, that's true. But I'm thinking about from the time that you obviously need to build those systems once you have some scale and once you're at a certain level of success. So, I mean, it was a decent amount of time, but your lack of self-awareness hurt you for, it sounds like, many years before you figured that out.
I'd say 15 years of mistakes. And I think the part of why I'm passionate about, writing books and why we're doing these podcasts and why we're talking is that there's lessons in not just my life, but your life that we can save some people some pain and suffering.
Yeah, for sure.
So not only what to do, but
Right.
also what not to do.
For sure. Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know how are we doing on time there?
I think we got,
Where
we got some time. So
You're probably at, because I started a little bit, you're probably at 40 minutes, I think. 40 minutes.
we going
So
to?
we
I think we need to
should
probably
wrap it up.
Yeah, we should. Okay. So you now get this information from the guy from PNC, right? The individual from PNC. So during this time, it sounds like you bought a house. I assume were you buying other assets? How did this process evolve from that point?
Well, my core competency was around two things. It was buying real estate, buying and owning real estate. It was lending money. So actually by age 25, I'd owned 100 rental properties.
Wow.
Okay.
At what age?
No, by age 30, I owned
Okay.
100 rental properties.
Wow.
And I had actually used somebody else's money to acquire all this real estate.
Great.
And I paid a low price of 2% a month.
A low price
of 2% a month.
Of 2%.
Yeah. The good news is
So you're talking about, so just to be clear, you're saying 24% interest.
there was a wealthy attorney in Baltimore, I don't want to mention any names, back in the 1980s and early 1990s that would lend me all the money I wanted at 2% a month.
So at 24% cost every year, you must have gotten a pretty significant discount on the real estate to make that work?
Well, I bought, houses back then. I paid between $15,000 and $50,000, so relatively low end housing. And what I would do is I would use this 2% a month money to acquire it, renovate it, get it renovated,
And then, yeah.
get a tenant in there, and then I would go to this president of the bank, friend of mine.
Okay, so you use that high cost money for the short term.
That's right. And then this
for
president of
you.
the bank would lend me 75% of the appraisal, didn't matter what I paid for it. So I was just circulating.
Wow.
And I had accumulated over 200 properties
Yeah, it's
that
perfect.
way.
It's perfect.
So that was the initial contributor of
And where
my-
are those properties today? Do you still own those properties?
No, do I still own? Yeah, I own about eight of the original 100.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wish that's a whole nother topic for another time, but
Right.
selling those properties,
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the principles, knowing what you know now, I assume you would think about things a little bit differently. I know I do. So that's
never
why-
have sold any of those
Right.
houses.
Yeah, I feel the same way about a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a lesson.
That's a lesson.
That's
Yeah.
a lesson that we'll get into probably in another time.
Later, yeah. I'll have to
Where we'll
have
talk about-
a little bit of vodka in front of me.
Yeah,
when
I was
we-
going to say,
when we're
like,
talking
if you
about that.
want to get to like one day when you're feeling a little depressed, we'll talk to you a little bit more about your life and the mistakes that you made. We'll do a mistake podcast. That's great. Well, so sounds like you were incredibly successful, right? Made a ton of money, had really, really deep knowledge on that subject. Where does that take you from there?
Yeah, fast forward, Link Capital is the firm that you and I founded. I guess we should tell everybody that. Lyons and Fink, right?
Correct.
There you go.
Yep.
That was started in 2013. That was number 7 in the mortgage world for me, mortgage platform.
Right.
Here we are 40 years later. It's all been around real estate, and it's all been around lending money. And my passion is now writing and teaching and helping others. But it's kind of a boring story in between. Just a lot of grinding it out.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I think your experience and some of the mistakes that you've made, certainly I've made, can be pretty helpful to some other people. So it's good that you're getting this out there, and I think just creating the format for people that they can follow is incredibly helpful to everybody.
Yeah. So as we close, Alex, let's take the formula, right,
Yeah.
that we talk about here in this book, and let's just, because we're going to do that with my story, your story, and all the guests that we invite. But I developed a core competency in lending money and real estate. I used that core competency. I leveraged that core competency to scale my income by hiring and leveraging other people. So that's the creation of variable A. It's the utilization of variable C. I knew how to acquire assets, right? Whether it is acquiring real estate, but also when you're building an enterprise, right? Well, you and I have sold an enterprise before. We've sold several companies, and building enterprise value is the contributor to variable B, which is the acquisition of assets. I've certainly leveraged people's time, and I've leveraged a lot of money. I used my short-term use of time to become an expert in lending, and I use my long-term use of time by applying, a long-term approach to things. So that's how I've executed on the wealth creation formula.
Yeah, for sure. You're like the poster child for this formula.
Well, it's
For
because
sure.
I'm old. I'm the poster child.
But what's funny is so many people are, and they don't even realize it, right? So
Everybody that is financially wealthy has applied the wealth creation formula.
for sure. I agree with that.
And we're going to prove that to our audience. We're going to unravel that completely.
I agree. Look forward to it.
Yeah.
Ben,
Okay.
thanks. It was fun.
Yeah. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right.
Didn't know that about your grandmother. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
That's
Hey, we'll see you in the next podcast. Thanks for watching.